Hello, ladies and gents. On Influence You today, young teenagers, mature teenagers, young adults, mature adults, OAPs. We're on academic integrity of arts and humanities. We're on the block A225. Stay tuned because I'll give you an insight of how you should be successful in your education, ambition and anxiety, 1789 to 1814. It's edited by Paul Lawrence. When we read, we should read methodically, and we should reference our reading to what we was reading, where we started and where we left off, where the book was published. Important, isn't it? The book was edited by Paul Lawrence, Ambition and Anxiety, 1789 to 1840. It's published at the Open University, Walton Hall, Milton Keynes. Published in 2017. We're on Unit 3, The Rise of the Working Class, page 110. Also, have a pen highlighting some of the main words. Writing down the meaning of the words. It's important. Let me just get my book of words. I think our last word was obsolence. Yes, it was. Page 110. These figures do not necessarily mean that purchasing power of working class families increased. The men's wages increased. The decline of household production reduced women's ability to earn money, and therefore the total income of families often decreased in real terms in the period. Exercise 3.3 illustrates difficulties encountered by many families. I have explained that industrialization was disrupting customary norms and traditional work and family arrangements. This caused much anxiety among all social classes, which is why several public inquiries, such as royal commissions and select committees, were set up to investigate the effects of industrialisation. Below is an extract from a report by a commission set up in 1837 to examine the living conditions of handloom weavers. Handloom weaving had experienced a bloom at the turn of the century, but textile production had since become increasingly industrialised, leading to unemployment and a drop in wages. In this extract, the report presents the household budget of a journeyman weaver, a trained weaver employed by a master weaver. Note that in discussion of money here, I means £1. Read the text carefully and consider the following questions. Not counting allowance from the parish, which are form of poor relief. How much do the weaver and his family earn per week? How much do their weekly expenditures amount to? Can you spot any words or phrases that indicate that the author of the report of sympathetic to the difficult condition of weavers? This should take around 15 minutes. Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Condition of the Handloom Weavers in England and Wales, 1839. 1839. The following is a case of an outdoor journeyman weaver with a wife and 6 children. His employment, a master weaver, James Hitchens, says that journeyman weavers do not earn more on the average of them 5s or 6s weekly. Hitchens states that the clothes of Francis Berry, his journeyman, are all pawned. He is in debt for rent and owes to the baker. He was in the workhouse for 10 weeks. He now receives 4s a week from the parish. He thoroughly understands his calling, is an honest and hard-working man. He has fast tasted neither tea nor sugar for some time, and his breakfast is nothing more than some bread, hot water and salt. I'm looking at the income, earnings for Francis Berry. I'm not sure what S stands for. S is something to do with his money. S shillings. Shillings. I don't know what D means. I don't know if anyone knows. Anyway, he earns 5 shillings. Earnings of his wife chairing, she earns 3 shillings. Earning of his boy in the factory, 2 shillings. Earning of his girl, 1 shilling. Allowance from the parish is 4 shillings. The total, he gets 15 shillings. His expenditure: 3 pecks of potatoes, uh, 2 shillings. 24 loaves. It's £2 in a loaf of bread. Yeah, 7 shillings. Scraps of meat, 1 shilling. Firing soap and soda, 2 shillings. That's equals 15 shillings. Here's a case of the point where a parish supplies deficiency of wages. The earned income of his family is made up of the wages of the husband and wife and 2 of the children. These wages add up to 11 shillings and 6d, whatever that is, per week. Their expenditures for the basic necessities adds up to 15 shillings. Add whatever that d is, I'm not sure what that is. About 76 pence. This means that they spend more than they earn and need the extra 4 shillings, 20 pence provided by the parish to survive. Firstly, the author provides a moral assessment of the husband's character. He is portrayed as an honest, hard-working man who foregoes luxuries. He has tasted neither tea nor sugar for some time. Second, the household budget shows that the family relies on allowance from the parish to survive. The author underlines this last point as a conclusion. This could be an argument in favour of higher wages for handloom weavers, so that local parishes do not have to make up their shortfall. In a discussion, the Royal Commission was set up by MPs concerned with the poor living conditions of handloom weavers. It handed in its final report in 1841. But living there numbers continued to drop while this content as low wages and unemployment mounted. Leisure, health and education. The subjection above considered what wage levels can reveal about working class standards of living during the Industrial Revolution. As touched on already, real wages are not the whole story. However, the new ways of working linked to industrialisation also had an impact on quality of life, and hence factors such as possibility for leisure and education. The standards of health need also to be considered in any assessment of change over time in working class daily life. This subsection will consider each of these 3 factors in turn, starting with leisure. The 18th century had strong cultural of popular leisure. Pastimes include wrestling, football, cockfighting, and many other games and sports. In agricultural communities, these activities usually happened at a time of markets and fairs, while artisans and manufacturing workers often took Monday off. A practice tolerated by business owners and referred to as Saints' Monday. Among the more prosperous workers, these 3 traditional working class activities were occasionally supplemented by more structural leisure practices borrowed from middle class culture, which required both spare time and spare money, such as prize fighting or theatre. The process of industrialisation, however, gradually decreased the space and time available for leisure. In this period, working times and child labour both increased. In the early 1800s, workers tended to work longer hours than in previous centres, about 3,300 hours per year, between 1800 and 1830, which is also approximately double the level in Britain in 2000. By 2004, and the number of children working in factories doubled between the late 1780s and the late 1830s in Humphreys 2004. New rapidly grown urban areas did not always include leisure space other than pubs, olfactory schedules. It became increasingly strict as employers established new work disciplines in order to improve productivity. The custom of observing holiday weeks. The South Lancashire, for example, was strongly attacked by cotton manufacturers in the second quarter of the 19th century. New habits of work discipline were thus gradually established, much to the approval of middle class observer of the Cornish mining community in 1817. Desperate wrestling matches inhuman cockfights, pitched battles, and riotous revelings are happily now of much rarer occurrence than heretofore. The spirit of the sport has evaporated, and that of the industry has supplied its place. The constant pursuit of steady labour has nearly banished the traditional season of vulgar riot and dissipation. In farming communities, parallel developments were taking place, largely due to the process of enclosures, which deprived rural areas of common areas such as for leisure. A contemporary noted in 1824 that owing to the enclosure of open lands and commissions, the poor have no place in which they may amuse themselves in summer evenings, when the labour of the day is over, or when their holiday occurs. Thus, although many popular traditions continue to be practised locally, the Industrial Revolution may well have had an adverse impact on the opportunity for leisure for the working class. Another consequence of longer working hours was that there was little time left for education. Literacy rates did increase between 1789 and 1840, but only slowly. It is in fact quite difficult to measure literacy rates accurately. The best method historians have found is to examine church registers to see how many people were able to sign their own name. By this method, they estimate that working class literacy increased by only 13% in the first half of the 19th century. By 1840, almost 60% of working class men were able to sign their own name, while 50% of working class women remained entirely illiterate. Mid 2004, there was no significant increase because educational provisions still relied on local voluntary initiatives, which were piecemeal and very unequal depending on location. For instance, in urban areas, school enrolment was often as low as 5% in the 1800s, while it could be as high as 50% in rural areas. Rule 1986, in fact, the educational institutions children were most likely to attend were not daily schools, but rather Sunday schools, which grew in a number of the late 18th century and were attended by many working class children by the mid 19th century. Their effectiveness was very limited, just not because they could not only use time when children were not working, but also because many of them did not teach writing. After concerns were voiced the moral welfare of young children employed in factories, a number of acts were passed by Parliament to regulate their working conditions and facilitate their education. For instance, the Health and Morals of Apprentices Acts of 1802 stipulated the children in apprenticeships. They were to be educated in reading, writing, and arithmetic, everyday working. Further acts followed in 1819, 1825, and 1829, but the legislation remained vague and largely unenforced until 1833, when a small professional factory inspectorate was established. Health is another indicator of living standards often used by historians like education. The general health of working people improved in the period, but only very slow. As you can imagine, it is not easy to measure the general health of people who lived over 200 years ago. Historians rely on proxy measures such as height, which reflects the quality of an individual's nutrition, especially in childhood. Average heights in Britain were much lower than they are today, and the differences between the high and low cases were enormous. For instance, 1790, a 14-year-old boy from a wealthy family was on average 14 centimetres, 5.5 inches taller than a 14-year-old boy from a poor family. Average heights did not improve significantly in the first decades of the Industrial Revolution, which indicates what working class children were not receiving better nutrition. In 1760, average life expectancy in Britain was 34 years, which means that a newborn baby could expect to survive until the age of 34. By 1840, life expectancy was 39 years. But this improvement conceals important geographical disparities. Life expectancy actually decreased in some of the industrialising northern cities in the period, due in large part to rise in infant mortality. Table 3 gives an overview of the evolution of 5 indicators of the standard of living often used by historians, including those discussed above. The data supports a general picture already outlined in the unit so far. That while the period witnessed positive changes to some areas of working class life, they were often slow to arrive and marginal at best. Other indicators, working hours in particular, were undeniable worse at the end of the period. Overall, while it is possible to identify broad patterns of development in the condition of working classes, change was slower than might be expected and very variable. The changes wrought by the Industrial Revolution were by no means humongous or coherent. Given this, it seems likely that a clear working class identity emerged simply as a result of common experiences and transitions. As discussed, however, the course of industrialization often entailed developments detrimental to the lives of working people. It also sparked a range of social and political protests. The next section will focus on these protests and then investigate whether in fact, it is the very act of resistance that provided common ground within their classes and ultimately led to the development of a shared identity. Page 116, Political Identity and Agency. In a previous section, I explained how the Industrial Revolution affected lives of working classes. The period 1789 to 1840 was a time of transition during which many traditional patterns of work and leisure continued to survive along new, modern patterns of industrial work. In this section, I will show that the juxtaposition of these traditional and modern patterns produced many frictions that often set the workers against their employees and state authorities. It has been suggested that through these many conflicts, small and large, localized and national, the working classes gradually come to think of themselves as a group that had economic and political interests in common. By the end of the period, according to E.P. Thompson, 1965, working class people come to feel an identity of interest at between themselves and as against their rulers and employers. This section will evaluate this claim by examining how traditional patterns of localized protest and conflict continue to coexist with new strategies of mass action, unionism, and eventually class-based political activism. You should note that this section primarily relates to working classes in England, Wales, and Scotland. In Ireland, popular politics took quite a different course, as you'll learn in the unit Imagine Nations Made Real. Now go to the module website, Activity 3.2, Thompson Marking English Working Class. This should take around 45 minutes. Popular radicalism in the 1790s. Unit 1, you examine the impact of the French Revolution in Britain through the example of the Scottish radical Thomas More. You learn that the situation in France inspired new political ideas and stirred up popular protest and demand for change, but also that Britain's elites and government remained highly suspicious of political reform. Let's now examine the same issue from a slightly different perspective to pose the question: did the rise of radical agitation and reform societies in the early 1790s play a part in building a sense of working class identity in Britain? While popular agitation was not an entirely new phenomenon in Britain, the reform movement of the 1790s was in many ways a break with previous patterns of violent popular protest that tended to be motivated by economic concerns. For instance, the bread riots of the early 18th century. It began as a connotation of reformist aristocrats as well as middle class and working class workers arguing for the extension of the franchise. Then the widespread distribution of Thomas Paine's 1791 Republican and egalitarian pamphlet, Rights of Man's transformed the movement. The pamphlet praised the French Revolution and did not advocate gradual reform, but rather a radical overhaul of the entire political system. Paine's ideas were particularly successful among artisans, shopkeepers, and traders. These groups soon broke away from the leadership of middle-class reformers in order to assume leadership of their own movements. They established their own organisations, especially reform societies you have encountered in Unit 1. These reform societies sprang up all over the country, The first one was founded in December 1791 by manufacturing workers in Sheffield and sent envoys to encourage the foundation of similar societies in Leeds, Birmingham, and Coventry. In 1792, the shoemaker Thomas Hardy, 1752-1832, founded in London Corresponding Society, which attracted craftsmen, tradesmen, and shopkeepers. Other societies were founded too, especially in industrial towns with no adequate party representation, such as Manchester in October 1793. The Scottish Society of the Friends of the People held a British convention that gathered delegates from a number of other corresponding societies, including Sheffield and London. The Reformed societies in the 1790s never gathered more than a significant minority of working people, but were an important landmark in the history of the Reform movement. For the first time, working men were organised in order to further their political interests of disenfranchised working men. They corresponded in organised meetings with like-minded reformists, including the French revolutionaries, and endeavoured to educate ordinary workers about democratic reform through public meetings such as the meetings shown in figure 3.3. Travelling speakers and publications, this new popular radicalism developed political demands that were more ambitious than the traditional middle-class demands for limited widening of the franchise. Radicals campaigned for universal, usually male suffrage, but sometimes also for the rights of women and property redistribution through the abolition of land ownership. You may notice that I'm referring to the popular reformist movement led by the working men, but not as working class movement. This is because these activists normally did not refer to themselves as being working class. This is an important distinction in order to know whether ordinary workers identified as part of working class. It is not enough to know about their political activities. We also need to pay attention to how reformists talked about themselves, to listen to what they actually said and wrote. Stephen Jones, 1983. In addition, while they campaigned for reforms, they would generally favour working class men. This was usually the same of universal ideas, equality and rights, not to further the interests of one class at the expense of other groups of society. Despite this, the authorities still sought to clamp down hard on these early protests and reform societies, as you will see in exercise 3.4. Thomas Spence, 1750-1814, was well known radical and bookseller. He advocated the abolition of private property and land, parliamentary reform, and the rights of women and children. He used various tactics to popularise his plan for land reform among poor communities, including writing and publishing periodicals and the production of tokens. It shows two tokens produced by Spence. The first one reads "The End of Oppression" and depicts revolutionaries burning land charters. The second shows a bust of Spence and reads T. Spence, 7 months in prison for high treason. Try to put yourself in Spence's shoes and answer the following questions. Why did Spence produce his tokens, and to whom might he have distributed them? It is likely that Spence used contemporary fashion for tokens to advertise himself and his controversial political plans. Tokens were a visual way to disseminate his message among a popular audience that was not necessarily illiterate. The first token gives a pithy, visual summary of Spence's political programme. The abolition of land property will mean a more economically equal society. The second token may appear more puzzling to you. Why would someone want to advertise that they spent time in prison? Spence probably had two reasons for doing so. First, the token was a way to promote himself and his radical programme among poor communities.